Welcome everyone. I hope most of you managed to have a relatively quiet August and feel somewhat rejuvenated now that Parliament's back in full swing. But thanks for joining us today for Project Boost session on working with an MP's office. We're delighted to be joined by Cassie Rist, who is a Senior Parliamentary Researcher looking at the green transition, industrial strategy and economic policy for Labour MP Dr. Jeevun Sandher. Cassie will be giving us an overview of how an MP's office is structured, roles and responsibilities, tips for best engagement with staffers, and more. Before we begin, as a reminder, please could you pop your names and organisations into your Zoom profiles. We'll be kicking off with Cassie's presentation, and as I mentioned, because it's lunchtime, please don't feel like you have to put your cameras on. However, if you'd like to turn your cameras on during the last 20 minutes or so when we have our Q&A, then that would be fab. We are also recording this session and we'll be uploading it to our website. So thanks again, and thanks so much for being here, Cassie. I'll pass over to you to start us off. And Siri, would you mind sharing the slides for us, please?
Thank you, Nadia. Yeah, and do put up the slides when you're ready. So my name's Cassie Rist. I work for Jeevun Sandher. I've worked for him since last October with a 5-month stint in jury duty in the middle, which took me out of Parliament for quite a long time. But prior to that, I worked for Miata Fambulla in Peckham, doing her organising prior to the election. And then prior to that, I worked for Wildlife and Countryside Link, which I'm sure many of you will have heard of, with Richard Benwell. And before that, I worked in a joint unit in DEFRA and DESNES on offshore wind deployment in the civil service. So I've kind of done a bit of everything and come at this role from all sides. Next slide, please. I guess I'll start with office structure and responsibilities. So I suppose the most important thing to remember is that every MP's office is set up completely differently. So they get a budget of £250,000 allocated to each MP, and they can decide exactly how they want to spend it. So it might be paying someone £125,000 to advise them and they have 1 member of staff. It could be paying lots of people minimum wage and they might have 8 members of staff and they might have less experience. So different titles that you see flying around kind of don't really mean that much, because there are very many different titles and they all have like slightly different jobs. So I've picked out the ones that I think are the most common, but you'll see like a lot of variation in this, because offices can be so tailored to what a specific MP would want. But typically there's about 5 members of staff per MP. Depending on what the MP's interests are, some might be more focused in Westminster and some might be more focused in the constituency. And so their staff will be weighted accordingly. It's general that there will be 1 to 2 people in Westminster and then several more in the constituency, usually about 3 or 4. This can depend on the size of their majority, as well as kind of personal preference. So if you have a small majority, you might want to focus more locally because you'll be worried about being re-elected, and therefore you might have more staff in the constituency. I guess the first thing to know is, when you're engaging with an MP's office and their staff, it's important to remember whether they're a frontbench minister, whether the MP is a PPS, or whether they're a backbencher, because this will totally affect the type of work that that office is allowed to do. So if that MP is a frontbencher or a PPS, they're really closely whipped to the government position and won't be able to deviate from what the government is of the day is saying, whereas backbenchers obviously have a lot more freedom. Parliamentary secretary. So PPS are political appointees, and they are kind of like linked up to a department, and they are responsible for whipping the PLP, which is the Parliamentary Labour Party, behind the policies of that department. So, for example, if you're the PPS for the Department of Justice, Ministry of Justice, then that PPS is in charge of sending round oral questions to different MPs, getting MPs to come to justice debates, and various things like that. So every department will have one, and their offices are more restricted than backbenchers, although they're not fully classed as kind of frontbenchers. Generally, you'll be engaging with the parliamentary staff in the work that you do, but you might be working with some constituency staff if you're kind of, for example, I remember when I worked in Wildlife and Countryside Link, organising visits for MPs in the constituency, to kind of like a nature reserve or whatever, you might end up liaising a bit with the constituency staff because they often hold the keys to the diary in a constituency. But I guess generally on parliamentary business, you'll be working with the parliamentary staff. So just to run through them really quickly, I've outlined like the various roles and responsibilities that's typical. So just refer to this slide if you kind of see a job title and you don't know what that person might do. But the office manager tends to be split and have oversight of both offices, so Westminster and the constituency. Case workers will be completely separate and you'll have almost no contact with them because they work specifically in the constituency on different cases. And then there's various parliamentary staff called different things that do pretty much the same stuff: interviews, speech writing, social media, working with journalists, and research to varying degrees depending on the MP's interest. So next slide, please.
Sorry, Cassie, could you really briefly explain what a PPS, please, is?
Yeah, so it's a political appointee and they work to specific departments, and they're, I suppose they're the political go-between between the minister, which is in government, and the Parliamentary Labour Party, or PLP, which is in Westminster. So the government and the Parliamentary Labour Party are slightly different. So if you're on the backbench, you're part of the party, whereas you're considered part of the government if you're a frontbencher. So there's a slightly different nuance to what you are allowed to do. And a PPS generally is the go-between between the two functions. So they'll bring the business of the day in the chamber, but also the political messaging, anything that the department's going to announce. And it's their job to disseminate it within the backbenchers and make sure that everybody's kind of like on message, knows what's going on. And for the various chamber debates, events, like etc., everybody knows where they should be. I've got so an example of a PPS. So Jeevun's wife, who he just married over the summer, Louise Jones, is the PPS for Ministry of Defence as a former vet. So she does that function for the MOD. And yeah, there's PPSs for most departments, if not all. I'm not sure about like very niche things, but most departments. I don't know if there's any more questions about that. No, okay. So this is a week in Westminster. Despite popular belief, I suppose, all weeks look quite similar in terms of their structure, although the content can be quite different. And being aware of what is mandatory for MPs to attend and where they'll typically be on the estate and what regular events and meetings are going on means that you can best plan your engagement and events for the best time. So I've kind of outlined a typical week in Westminster from an MP's perspective, and depending on the days, there's different whips. So if there's a one-line whip, MPs don't have to be on the estate, but if there's a three-line whip, MPs do have to be on the estate. And three-line whip usually comes into action at 2:30 on a Monday afternoon, because in the morning, generally, MPs will travel from their constituencies back down to Westminster. So if you had an event, for example, on a Monday morning, it's unlikely that people will attend because there'll be a lot fewer people on the estate. Similarly, on every Monday, there's a PLP, so a Parliamentary Labour Party meeting between 5 and 6, which generally all MPs go to. So again, if you decide to have an event at that time, expect not many people to arrive because they are previously engaged. Again, if you're working with select committee members or chairs, be aware of the select committee timing. So on a Monday, they all have their debriefs about what they're going to be doing in the select committee the following week. So if you want to influence what's going into a select committee's agenda for that week or the tone of their questions, then you really need to engage that MP early in the day on Monday, because in the afternoon they'll have this session with the chair to decide what the topics are. So those are generally what happens on a Monday. Tuesdays, generally select committees in the morning, and then activities in the chamber, so oral questions and debates. On Wednesdays, PMQs at 12. There's obviously a 3-line whip, so you have to be there. And straight after that, MPs generally go to the tea room to kind of like socialise and engage after PMQs. So again, if you're looking at event planning or engaging MPs, then kind of like between 12 and 1 on a Wednesday is probably not the best time to do that. Many of them will go straight from the tea room to their afternoon select committees on Wednesdays, which run until about 4:30. Does each MP they don't have to be part of the select committee, but because of the volume of select committees, most MPs are part of select committees. So it's just, but all the information about who's in what select committee is online. So if you're interested in a particular MP, you can just kind of search them and it will tell you. On Thursdays, it's a one-line whip, so that you don't have to be on the estate. So again, events that happen on this day might be less well attended. There's a business statement in the House and backbench business debates. MPs tend to come in less formal dress on Thursdays because they won't always go into the chamber where you have to wear a suit. So if you're looking to do kind of like an informal meeting, then that's a good day to do it. And on Fridays, Westminster, the House doesn't sit. So most MPs go to their constituencies on Thursday afternoon or Thursday evening, and then they come back, as I said, on Monday morning. I'd say as a general rule, Mondays and Tuesday evenings are the best time to host events in Parliament, as you're guaranteed all of the MPs are on the estate. Wednesday night is also good, but because Thursday is often a one-line whip, where MPs don't have to attend Parliament, there might be less people because some people might decide to go to their constituencies on a Wednesday evening. Very early mornings tend to be tricky, as MPs are often dropping children at the crèche or travelling in from their London flats. And because votes on a Monday night go on until 10 p.m, it's unlikely on a Tuesday that many will get in before kind of 9:30, because they would not have got home till like 11. It all sounds like quite specific, but these are the kind of things that are worth remembering when you're trying to engage, as like, I guess, tricks of the trade in a way, to make sure that you get the best quality engagement with an MP at the best time. And I guess also, yeah, just a note on checking if that MP is in a select committee, so you can plan engagement around them. And I guess just another note on Fridays is that sometimes there's private members' bills, so MPs will be in some Fridays, but again, just look online for parliamentary business and it will say. And recess, just a quick word on recess. It's a really good time to build relationships with MP staff, as they don't tend to have urgent parliamentary business to deal with. So if you want to get to know staffers, it's a good time to invite them for coffees. MPs will all go back to their constituencies for all of recess, so they won't be in Westminster if that's where you want to engage them. Next slide, please.
Cassie, we just had one question asking if you could clarify the difference between one-line whip, three-line whip.
So a one-line whip is when you don't have to be in the chamber or on the estate. And by the estate, I mean like the House of Commons, Portcullis House, which is like a meeting place, and Richmond House, which is where lots of the backbenchers have their offices. And you are advised to be in, but you don't have to be in. Whereas like a three-line whip, everybody has to be in because you've either got votes or it's PMQs. So that's why you see that the chamber is so crowded when there's PMQs, because it's a three-line whip and everybody has to be there. Whereas some other debates, you know, it's a one-line whip and therefore you don't have to be there. There's very occasionally a two-line whip, which is in between. And it doesn't happen that often, maybe like once or twice a year. And it's a bit of a grey area between do you have to get slipped, which is permission from the whip to not be on the estate, where you don't have to get slipped if there's a one-line whip, basically. Do you know when the other parties have their version of the PLP meeting? I actually don't know that, but I can find out if you send me an email afterwards, and I can put you in touch with the people that will know. So that's what an MP's week would look like. And then in terms of like a parliamentary researcher or parliamentary assistant, this is what my week would look like. So generally on Monday mornings, as I said, MPs travelling from their constituencies. Some parliamentary staff don't then come into the office until lunchtime because their MP isn't there, but most of them come in on like Monday mornings. And on Monday mornings, it will usually be spent planning the week ahead. So this includes catching up on the news and government announcements from the PLP office, horizon scanning for like media opportunities. So for example, one of the weeks in recess, it was GCSE results day. So you might look at that and think, oh, we want to do a social media post about it. Let me put it in a social media grid. You'd probably familiarise yourself with the inbox and emails that have come in over the weekend, and prioritise any engagements that you think that your MP should go to, and any briefings that the MP might require. This time on a Monday morning will often include putting in oral questions, and sort of submitting to be part of debates such as Westminster Hall debates, and planning your MP speaking schedule in the chamber. Most MPs will have their team meetings on a Monday lunchtime as soon as they get in. There'll be some variation. Some people have them a bit later in the afternoon. So if you want something to be on the agenda for that MP that week, it's best to speak to their staffers on like a Monday morning before the staffer then speaks to the MPs, because that is the time that a staffer will be planning what the MP does for the week ahead. Again, as I kind of said, if the member you want to engage with is part of the select committee, then you again want to approach on a Monday morning before they have this like discussion meeting. Tuesdays, generally, there are select committees. So as a staffer, you don't have to go to them. And again, your office will be a bit quieter. So you won't have to like advise your MP directly because they'll be somewhere else. This is a time where we might prepare speeches for later in the week, and write briefings, etc. Generally, a member will go to the chamber at the opposite time to the select committee. So if you have to be in the select committee in the morning, it's likely the member will be speaking in debate in the afternoon, and vice versa. A note on like writing speeches and questions. The process is really quick. So for example, yesterday, Jeevun came in the morning at 9 and he wanted to go into the Treasury debate at 11. And we had to write a speech for him in those 2 hours with like stats, etc. So it can be a very, very quick process. But you can have more lead-in time if there is kind of like a bigger speech coming up. And this is important, I suppose, for external organisations that support MPs' offices, is that the process for feeding into these types of things are often extremely quick with extremely short deadlines. So I'll come on to like best ways to engage with it later. But a point to note here is that it's generally best to give your WhatsApp details to any parliamentary staff so they can WhatsApp you to ask questions and ask for stats for speeches and ask for lines, because they'll be doing these things at a really, really rapid pace and they'll want to contact you really quickly. A quick note on oral questions. The PLP office, so the Parliamentary Labour Party office, send round prescribed questions for MPs to submit. So most MPs will submit these questions as they have a higher chance of getting selected. And if they get selected, they're allowed to ask supplementary questions or follow-ups where they put their own spin on questions. So as organisations working in advocacy, I would refrain from circulating suggested parliamentary questions, and instead focus on building relationships with officers to support drafting of supplementary questions. So once you've put in a question and you get confirmation that you'll be able to ask your question in the chamber, then the parliamentary staff will work on supplementary questions, which is where you might want stats, where you might want an external organisation to help you fill in the gaps. On Wednesday, generally, depending on your MP schedule, it will be more of the same. And Thursday, as I said, usually a bit quieter. Jeevun or MPs will generally spend more time in the office with their staffers. So I will tend to catch up with him about priorities and research needs for the week ahead, or we'll debrief and chat about things that have happened over the last 2 days, like Tuesday and Wednesday, where we tend to see him a lot less. As staff, I and most other staffers will meet with think tanks and charities and stuff on Thursdays because the parliamentary business is less busy, and use that kind of engagement time to inform my work the following week. So for Treasury Select Committee, for example, we have a group of economists that advise our question writing, and we meet with them on a Thursday to kind of review the questions for the following week. And Jeevun runs the Living Standards Coalition, so I'll use Thursdays to kind of like meet up with other staffers that work on the organising committee, and review any actions that MPs should be undertaking. And Fridays, we don't have to be on the estate as parliamentary teams, so we tend to work from home. And this will be mostly spent catching up with emails, looking at meeting requests, forward planning, kind of doing any strategizing for comms or long-term thinking that needs to happen, reading articles that are interesting, etc. It's a bit of more of a slow case day, which is usually really good. Next slide, please. So here's some tips on how best to engage with officers. So building personal relationships with staff, as I'd say, is probably the key one. So once you've identified who you need to talk to, make sure you always copy them into correspondences that you wish to contact the MP about. So staffers that are in Westminster don't always monitor the central inbox for MPs. So for example, Eve in the constituency manages our inbox, and she'll send me anything she thinks relevant to parliamentary business directly to my email. Whereas obviously if you're sending in a briefing to the inbox, but you have the name of the staffer in their email, if you copy them in, they'll get it directly rather than having to go through that process. And lots of stuff gets missed in that kind of triaging. So if you can get stuff to go to them specifically, it will be picked up in a much more timely manner. And different parliamentary staff will work on different topics. So it's useful to get to know who does what. So you can pick up on who you should go to. So for example, in our office, I work on the Living Standards Coalition, but Gideon, our other researcher, works on debt and international development and defence. So, you know, there's a differentiation between who you would contact in our office depending on what you wanted to speak to them about. Yeah, as I said, always offer out your WhatsApp number because it's just much quicker and easier. We have a disappearing message policy on Teams in Parliament, so we don't keep the messages, so we don't do any communication barely on Teams and mostly on WhatsApp. So we'll have like team WhatsApp groups where we communicate about the work of the day. So it's better to catch people in this way rather than in any other form. And I would say genuinely invest time becoming staff as friends and engaging with them, as they're the ones who will be briefing MPs quickly on topics in the margins around different events. The second one is MPs' interest, so getting to know what the MP you're interested in specifically does. They're always more likely to engage when the email sender knows what the MP is interested in. So, you know, perhaps starting an email with, I really enjoyed your speech in the chamber on X, and that's why this prompted me to write to you. This, of course, will take more time, but you're more likely to get a better response. There's no point sending emails to MPs when they have absolutely no interest in the topic. So get to know what they speak on in the chamber, which APPGs they attend, all of which is online. And also making something constituency specific is useful. So if you have stats about decline in nature's rates, can you do that specific to a constituency and send it through? Similarly, important to keep up with the politics of the day. So would it be appropriate to send an email about banning lead ammunition when they're in the middle of a massive crisis about the welfare vote, for example? Could I wait until it's kind of World Anti-Lead Ammunition Day, or there's like a debate in the chamber that an MP might want to speak on to send through my message? So I think just a note on when you're sending stuff and if there's something in the media or the news which is a useful link, and make sure you're really familiar with the parliamentary business that's going on, which is just like what's on Parliament if you Google it, and try and link to stuff that's happening that week, because again, you're much more likely to have engagement. I guess a quick note on preparing for short deadlines and rapid engagement. I've kind of touched on this. There's not a great deal of planning, shock horror, with what an MP is going to do week by week, and staffers are very much at the whim of like an MP, what an MP wants to do. So as I said, if they decide they want to speak in a debate in the chamber in the afternoon and it's the morning, then they'll just say that they want to do that. There won't be a lot of leading time. So this means being aware of the parliamentary schedule is super important, because you can anticipate what MP would want to speak on what, and you can send them information ahead of time. Similarly, being on hand to provide information at a moment's notice means staffers will come back to you again and again for information. And I know it's annoying, but it does mean that you have to check your phone quite a lot. But I promise you, it's the best way to engage with officers. And tailor engagement and make it as short as possible. MPs are very interested in a lot of things. They're incredibly time poor. So making things short is essential. It sounds really simple, but even making sure that each email is titled to an individual MP rather than just having like a blanket greeting yields better results. I would say sending entire briefings is kind of pointless unless an MP, you know, they're specifically interested. But if you're trying to kind of engage for the first time, 2, 3, 4 bullet points at the top with your message is kind of as much as you would need. And then the staff would pick that up and reach out to you if they want to work with you further or get kind of more details. I would say when meeting MPs or staff, as print briefings off, it's quite an analog situation in Parliament. So having something in your hand, I'd say is really important. It could be taken back to the office, it could be shared around. That's really useful. And make sure any kind of printed briefing is no more than 2 pages. I would say if you're also engaging like through a meeting, send a follow-up email after you've met an MP with further links if you have more information. So key details on 2 pages, and then anything else can be sent up as a follow-up. Next slide, please. So I've kind of outlined some key questions of what you should think about how not to engage. So ask yourself, is this relevant to the MP? Can I make this politically relevant? And is what I'm sending politically relevant, or is my engagement politically relevant? And if not, how can I make it so? Is this how I would want to be lobbied? So put yourself in their shoes. Like if you were an MP, is this how you would want to be engaged? If you're sending an email, could I ascertain in 30 seconds what the email is about? You'd be shocked at the amount of emails we get that are texts with no paragraphing, no colours, no pictures, no bullet points, and they're from like advocacy professionals who are trying to grab your attention, and it's literally like 10 lines of just word. And I guess also ask yourself, like, if I knew nothing about this topic, would I understand it? MPs tend to have really detailed knowledge on some things because they come from many different professional backgrounds, but they won't understand everything. So asking like, would a layperson understand this is really useful. And again, just another mention of like, could I introduce a constituency angle to what I'm doing to like grab their attention is also really important. So I guess how not to engage is the opposite of all of these questions. So it's not relevant to the MP, it's not politically relevant, it's not a very nice way to be lobbied, I don't understand what it means in 5 seconds, I can't ascertain what it's about if I knew nothing about the topic, and it has nothing to do with the constituency. I think that's a very whistle-stop tour of working with an MP's office. I'm more than happy to stay for as long as anyone wants to ask questions, but thank you.
Thanks so much, Cassie. So much to unpack there. Yeah, super helpful. Yeah, we're in the Q&A part of the session, so if people want to put their hands up or pop questions in the chat. But while you do that, there were a few questions that had come up in the chat already, which while you will get your questions ready, I'll read them out. But one question asks whether there are any ways to suggest questions to the Parliamentary Labour Party.
The short answer is no. They will be politically written, and the way that questions are asking, or the way that oral questions are worked in Parliament is that you will submit a question that's been pre-written by the PLP, and if you haven't, but you end up getting through the ballot, then the PPS or the special advisor for whichever minister is giving is answering questions will WhatsApp the MP. They will ask them what the question is so their minister can pre-prepare for the answer. So nothing is ever without pre-preparation. And also the ministers will get their civil servants to do that as well. So no minister is going into the chamber without pre-knowledge of what the questions are before. And the MPs are not allowed to kind of like hijack the ministers and go in with questions that they don't, like the ministers aren't aware of. It's just very much thought of as poor form. So in terms of influencing oral questions, as I mentioned in my slide, like supplementary is where you want to be going to influence. Like that second follow-up question that an MP is allowed to do is where you can get in your kind of like advocacy angle, and is where I would focus my efforts on. But it's something that I didn't know when I worked in the charity. Like I did not know that that was how it worked. So like, don't worry if you didn't know that that was how it worked.
That's a great answer. Thanks, Cassie. And we do have a guide which I'll share in the chat, which was included sort of working with the Parliamentary Labour Party, if that's helpful. But another question was just asking to clarify whether when you send briefings for the following week, is it best to send it on the Friday before or the Monday of that week?
Sorry, can you just ask that question again? I was looking at the.
No, no worries. So when you send a briefing, is it best to send it the Friday before or the Monday of that week?
I would say probably the Monday of that week, but it totally depends on the relationship you have with the office. Like for me coming in, if it's Monday, Jeevun's WhatsApp me, he says, I want to be in the DEFRA orals. I want to ask a question on flooding. And I start writing the supplementary question, but I need some stats. Like I'll go to the top of the inbox and I'll see if any external organizations have sent me anything that's useful, and then I'll just skim it off. And I'll WhatsApp people that I know that work in the sector and say, look, I need stats on blah, blah, or I need a draft supplementary question. And that will happen super rapidly. So I would say not counterintuitively, not sending things in advance is generally better.
Before I come to you, Emma, I'll just take one more question from the chat, which was, you did touch on this, Cassie, but it's asking, how do we best engage with MPs and officers that we haven't had previous contact with? And how do we identify staffers and their contact details in the first place? For example, are names available on websites?
Yeah, great question. If you Google MPs staffing list, all MPs have to declare who's working for them. So you can find out who is working for anyone. And that is from Angela Rayner and her special advisors all the way down to random backbencher X and their constituency staff. So all of the names will be written down. They have to be publicly available. And then all email addresses are exactly the same. It's first name dot second name at parliament.uk. So usually if you've got their name, unless they've got an abbreviation, you should be pretty safe to get to them. And all MPs' email addresses are also exactly the same, first name dot second name dot mp at parliament.uk. So you should be able to reach whoever you need to quite easily.
Oh, thanks. Emma.
I was going to ask something really similar to Rosie's question, which is would you recommend building relationships with staff before you have an issue to engage with, or is it better to identify MPs for your topic and then reach out to their staff and build relationships from there?
I think totally a mix of both, to be honest. If I'm trying to think of an example, for example, Luke Murphy works a lot on climate, he's interested in that kind of thing. If I was an organisation if I was Uplift, for example, if I was, working specifically on something to do with just transition, I know he has an interest in that. I'd probably just go directly to a staffer and say, we've got new stats or we've got a briefing or whatever, and say, do you want to go for a meeting so you can feed this back to him? But also cold calling MPs officers is also not a bad idea. So you can, we have emails that come directly to me, not to my MP's office, saying we think that you could be interested in this because we've identified X problem in the constituency. We had one come in saying you've got a lot of Hong Kong nationals at 617. There's a backbench debate next week on why that's important. Do you want to have some more information? We think it's going to be a big issue for you. And, we took the relationship from there. So it really sort of depends on what the parliamentary business is. I would say if you are cold calling, try and link it to something. So you can say and show them why you can provide value and what for, rather than just hello, do you want to go for a random coffee? Although I would say also do that during recess because staffers have nothing to do.
Thanks, great question.
Thank you.
No worries.
How does an MP get the question selected at Prime Minister questions?
It's a random ballot. It's a totally random ballot with sort of a wink in there of it's a totally random ballot. If your MP has a better relationship with the specific office that deals with allocations, then they may or may not do better in the random ballot.
Gotcha. Yes, Ruby.
Hi, I just wanted to say a massive thank you for this. It's been really interesting. So I'm from a charity called Hope for the Future, and we work with kind of democratic engagement and supporting other people with it. So it's really interesting to hear from a staffer's point of view. We work with a lot of like smaller organizations. So for example, I'm working with Mums for Lungs at the minute who like work on air pollution, but are often volunteers, often aren't based in London, and was wondering what's the best way to kind of get build relationships with your constituency offices rather than more the parliamentary one, which I know obviously you're parliamentary based, it might be a bit.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, most constituency offices will have a location. So there'll be like a physical, mostly, unless you have quite a high profile MP. So example, like Miata in Peckham doesn't have an office front because it's too dangerous to have like an office because it will get vandalized, etc. And I know Neil Coyle, also in Bermondsey next door, has had some issues with having an office front, but most MPs will have one. So you can meet, if there are people in the constituency that want to meet with the MP staff, they can meet them in that office. Like in Loughborough, there's a co-working space, and that's where our constituency staff work, and people pop in there all the time to kind of have meetings or whatever from the constituency. But again, like, you know, everyone uses Teams, etc., and people are happy to have kind of video calls. Again, like all of the information for constituency staff will be in the list of MP staffers. So if you want to get in contact with them specifically, I would suggest just going straight to the office manager, and then they'll divvy up whatever that needs doing to whoever is relevant in the constituency office. I would also say if those people want to meet the MP or meet the constituency staff, just go to canvassing sessions. Like the office manager and an MP will at least once a month, if not twice a month, during non-election periods, be running canvassing sessions in the constituency where you actually can just go and hijack an MP and ask questions. So I would just look on their Twitter or on the constituency Labour Party website and see where they're going to be to canvass.
Right, thank you.
No worries.
Super. I'm going to put these two questions together from the chat, but it's how to get an MP to table a Westminster Hall debate. What is the value of getting backbenchers to host a Westminster Hall debate versus other types of debates? It seems like a lot of effort. Is it worth it?
I mean, that is slightly up to you. I would say Westminster Hall debates, whilst obviously fascinating and on very niche topics, are limited somewhat in their value, I suppose, politically. Like the way that I see them having value is they often like create a moment or show that a topic is on an agenda, for example. So if there's suddenly like many requests for Westminster Hall debates on, say, tax rises, and the Parliamentary Labour office, the Parliamentary Labour Party office, and the Whip's office, and the tabling office will see that lots of different MPs have asked for this Westminster Hall debate to be tabled, and they will pass that information like further up the ranks into the party. So it's quite a good way of showing that this is an issue that MPs care about, because there'll be like a critical mass. I would say it's also good to get kind of like a spotlight on a specific issue. So if you get one tabled and it's, you know, it can be on like litter from e-cigarettes, then it's quite a good way to like force it onto the parliamentary agenda in a way that it isn't like officially. And then everything that those MPs say will get written up in Hansard and be on like the books forever. So from that respect, it is quite useful. And then you can, like, whoever is the minister, or the junior minister that is in charge of that policy area, they like have to send a representative and they have to answer any questions submitted, so written, not verbally. So you will get responses. It's a good way of like forcing responses from departments if you're not getting them through like the usual route departmentally through the civil service. So that's also a good idea. I would say like a lot of MPs use them as kind of like practice for their speeches. So like we're trying to get Jeevun to come off book at the moment. So like with my carbon speeches right now, and we'll often pick like Westminster Hall debates with that we're interested in for him to go and like practice different techniques of speaking, and then use it to like clip them and put them on social media. So it's a really good way if you get one tabled and you do a good briefing. Like lots of the MPs will clip stuff from Westminster Hall debates, because the sound quality is better, there's a smaller room, so MPs usually perform better. And that's a good way to get your message out, because there'll be like a lot of MPs talking and getting clips from the same debate. So I'd say those are like probably the key reasons like you would want to do one. Plus MPs just do them because they do show that they care about specific issues, again, you know, it sends a signal to the right people higher up in the Labour Party that they are, you know, speaking on this issue, they're making an effort to bring it to the government's attention, etc.
Yeah, great points. Thanks. The next question is, what are the different ways that you could work with an MP's office to support your cause? What different actions could they take?
So I guess there's like several different ways. There's like meeting the MPs and the staffers and briefing them. So they have knowledge of your issue when they're working in the margins, when they're advising their MP, they can use, you know, by osmosis, things that you've said to them, they'll then repeat to their MP if they find them interesting. So having meetings and like going through your latest things. I'd say supporting with speeches and like supplementary questions, which is that kind of like over WhatsApp relationship, like very quick, very reactionary, like sending lines, sending information to inform the narrative in those speeches, etc. And I would also say, you know, same kind of goes for writing articles. You know, MP staff might want information, in which case they can come to you. And then like briefings for debates and for events. So I guess to go back to the select committee example, like if there's a select committee that your organisation is particularly interested in, then engaging the week before, the Friday before the Monday, where they decide what topics they're going to do, to say, hello, like I've got this really interesting idea for a question for Treasury Select, like, or whichever your select committee, can I talk to you about what I would want you to ask in select committee, etc. So those are probably like the main ways. And then MPs' offices tend to be like really under-resourced. So, or, you know, there's a lot to do and not very many people in Westminster to do it. So trying to find anything that you can do to kind of be helpful and like take the burden off the staff is generally really helpful. So, you know, rather than just sending like a list of stats or a briefing, sending like an actual draft of a supplementary question, way more helpful than just a bunch of random stats of a new report that you've written, or like actually sending through some speaking points, or actually sending through like a suggested article on the topic that you've written a report about or you want to talk to them about is much more helpful.
Thanks, Cassie, really helpful. And thanks, Roger, for sharing that link in the chat. Hopefully that answers a few questions about finding MP staffers' names. We do still have 15 minutes, so I'll give it just a moment in case anyone does have any more questions in the chat or hands. And if not, we get 15 minutes back of our... Yes, Ruby, go for it.
Sorry, everyone can have their
That's all.
15 minutes back after this. Yeah, basically a question we got asked from a community group was how can they make their event engaging for an MP to come to? So we always kind of advise to like do something maybe a bit different, like can you go to a walk or a visit to like a nature site or something like that. But have you got any advice of like how you can make that like invite or letter or anything like that really stand out amongst like the many emails that you get? Because we always say like, you know, be nice because a lot of the things that you get are not nice. But any other like tips potentially?
So I think like for the parliamentary side, like MPs don't really like leaving the estate. They're very busy. They don't want to go very far. So like not suggesting they come to your office, but coming to them and meeting them where they're at, I think is most important. But in the constituency specifically, I would say it's that thing of tying it to, you know, either business of the day or like news of the week or what's happening in current affairs. So like, you know, if you want someone to come and look around a school and it is GCSE results day, then like hooking your school tour to that means that they'll be able to get good social media out of it. They'll be able to make a bit of a news story about it. They'll be able to say like on GCSE day, I went here to look around X, Y, Z. So like tying it to something that makes it relevant is really important. Like I'd say MPs rarely do, like being very candid, like rarely do stuff just for the pleasure of and joy of doing it. So, you know, if unemployment statistics come out on a Wednesday and you have a community group that does walks for people on universal credit for mental health, then like those are really good things to link together. So this MP like to better understand issues facing people on universal credit. And at this, like I went to join this walking group on the day that the unemployment statistics were released. That's obviously a very rushed example off the top of my head, but you get that general idea of like, how can I make what I am trying to pitch to an MP useful for them, which is like quite a crude and annoying way to have to look at things, but sadly, like that is how you have to try and think about it. So if community groups, or you can support community groups to think about their causes in that way, then that will make it really, I'd say, like that would make it a lot more intriguing and a lot more likely that people will want to engage in those events.
Great, thank you.
No worries.
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Ruby. We've got another question asking, what's the best way to give a briefing to as many MPs as possible? Is it possible to get rooms booked in Portcullis House and get lots of MPs there?
Yes, totally possible. You have to book rooms in Portcullis House through an MP's office. So I would say once you have a good relationship with staffers, use them to book rooms for you. And then you basically just get CC'd into an email chain and you take over the organisation once there's been that like initial contact from an MP's office. So you can do exactly that and get a room booked in PCH and brief lots of people at once. I would also look for different like parliamentary party groupings. So there's lots of different groups going around at the moment. There's like Labour Growth Group, there's like the Living Standards Coalition, which I run, there's like the Red Wall Group, there's like various different caucuses, and they're always looking for people to come speak at their monthly meetings. So if you think you have an issue that's particular to a group of MPs, like you're doing something on oceans and marine life, there's a group of coastal MPs that meet once a month, so you could go and meet them where they're at, basically, rather than like convening them for an event separately. You could just go to their event where they get together once a month anyway. So Labour List has a interactive function where you click on an MP and it tells you what groups that they're part of. So it's all online, it's fairly up to date. I gave them the most recent list for the Living Standards Coalition like last week, so it should have everything from that on. It's like mostly up to date, I'd say, and that kind of spans into like Labour Movement for Europe. There's hundreds of different things and it will tell you who is in what, basically. No worries.
Super, thanks. And we've got that. I will share this all in the follow-up email rather than the chat, because the chat's popping off. But we do have a guide on working with the Labour Party, which talks about stuff like that, and also one on booking events in Parliament, in case that's helpful for booking rooms in Portcullis House and knowing which rooms are best to book. We've got another question, which is what's the best way to find out an MP's interests?
I would say look on their social media is probably the quickest and easiest way to find out what they're interested in, because they'll rarely spend the time to do a video if they don't care about the issue in the video. And they'll tend to have like local constituency priorities. So for Jeevun, it's like bus routes and hydrogen and a couple of other things. And then in Westminster, he has like living standards as his priority. And as I said, like defence and international development. So there'll probably be like different focuses depending on who you want to engage in. So I would say just like first off, look at their social media. And then if you go to the parliamentary website, you can search per MP what debates they've been in and what they've said. And you can get basically a full list of what they said in their debates and the clips for it as well. So if you're really interested in lobbying an MP, you can go into that archive and basically like look at what they've said and find out the different themes of what they're talking about and the different topics that they go in for. And that's usually a very good way to, again, like find out what they are interested in talking about.
Yeah, thanks. Super question. I'll just give it a moment again in case there are any final questions.
You're
okay,
welcome.
I think that, yeah, thank you. This has been so helpful for me as well, and hopefully for everyone else. And thank you everyone who's come along and for such really great questions and for a really engaging discussion. So just to wrap up, we will be uploading this recording to our website, so you can go back and view anything, or if you've got any colleagues who missed it, please feel free to share that with them. I will share the guides that I mentioned, and we'll also produce a guide for this session. And as always, I'll send around a feedback form that I'd be really grateful if you could all fill out. But yeah, thanks again to everyone, and thanks so much, Cassie, for taking time out of your very busy parliamentary schedule for being here.
No problem. My pleasure. Love you, people. Bye.